Good morning, Icon. I'm so glad that all of you are joining us online today. It's been so great getting able to be able to meet with all of you, here on Sundays, and then if you've been tuning in for the Instagram and Facebook Lives that we've been doing during the week, and Zoom small groups and Zoom game nights and all things Zoom. It's just been really fun to be able to connect with all of you. And we just want you to know that as we continue in this weird time, that we are gonna keep doing our best to stay connected with you and to continue to provide you with opportunities to connect and just to feel like you're still a part of things around here, for all of us to feel like even though we're not together physically, that we're still able to connect with one another. And I also want to remind all of us that even though things look different right now, that who we are as a church, the things that we stand for, the way that we love one another, the way that we love our community, those things have not changed. And it has been so fun and so encouraging to watch the ways in which so many of you have been showing up for one another, the way that you have been caring for the vulnerable, the way that you have been loving each other and carrying each other through this time. It's just been so beautiful to see. And it's been beautiful to watch that across the board when it comes to the church, just to see ways that the church has really continued to love people well and to be a light and to bring hope. And there's been people both inside and outside of the church, in this time that as I have watched the things that people have done, it has been so inspiring. I mean, human beings, that the human spirit is fascinating to me. And the way that we are able to come together in tough times and rally together and make it our mission to be able to encourage and to help one another has just been so amazing to watch. We have seen people, self-sacrificing for one another. I've heard stories of, different CEOs of different organizations who have received zero pay in order that their employees could continue to get a paycheck. I've seen, people do drive-by birthday parades, and I've seen online, social distancing wedding celebrations, and to all of you amazing heroes that we call teachers, doing all of this online and distance learning, you are showing up for your students in such really huge and special ways. And it's in times like we're in right now, when things are kind of wild and uncertain and scary, we are able to really witness how resilient human beings are. And we are able to see the good that we are capable of, the generosity and the compassion that we are capable of. It's been so incredible to watch. But on the flip side of that, although we have all seen, and I have seen so much good, and so many things that have been giving me hope and that have been encouraging me and making me so proud of other human beings and the things that are happening. I think I've also, on the flip side, I've seen some stuff that has not been quite as encouraging. I've seen, division and arguing. I've seen people who, in their disagreement with one another, dehumanize each other. I've seen the tendency that we as humans have of dividing ourselves into these us and them camps. Times of crisis really do have a way of bringing out the very best in us, and they also have a way of bringing out the worst in us. And the thing is, as humans right now, and this is something that I'm really trying to remember and understand as I see some of this, is that as humans right now, we just aren't necessarily always going to be at our best. I mean, when we're, feeling uncertainty, or we're feeling fear, we're feeling loss, oftentimes we respond to others in ways that maybe we normally wouldn't, because we're feeling so much stress and so much hurt and so much pain and grief. So I've been really trying to remember that as I watch some of these things happening. But the truth is, it isn't only this COVID-19 crisis that has brought out this kind of behavior. I think we all know that this division and the fighting and the not being able to disagree in kind of good ways is something that it's not new. It always exists. I mean, all you have to do is scroll through social media and see the way that people respond to those that they disagree with, right? We've all had times where we've disagreed with people in our family or with friends or with people that we're in relationship with. And sometimes, and I know I've been guilty of this, sometimes even when we're having in-person conversations with each other, we can tend to care more about our opinion being heard or care more about being right in that moment than we do about listening and loving the other person. I mean, we all have people in our life that we disagree with, and we all have people in our life that are going to disagree with us. Whether it's our politics or our faith or the way that we parent or how we spend our money or how we spend our time or what career we choose or how we just view the world in general, there will always be someone who is going to see the way that we think or the way that we believe or the way that we vote, and they're going to disagree. And the same for us with them. There's always going to be people that we disagree with, and inevitably, when we disagree, that leads to conflict. It leads to conflict, and the thing is, it isn't the conflict itself that's bad, it's the way that we oftentimes handle the conflict. And so often, these conflicts can turn ugly. And especially, I feel like one of the ways where it gets the ugliest is online, because it's really easy to sit behind a screen and type a lot of things and to remove that person's humanity when you're not actually sitting face to face across from someone. But even in our in-person conversations, this happens where we can get upset and we get angry and we want to be right and we say things that are hurtful, all in the name of defending our position or our opinion. And I have been guilty of this myself, and I oftentimes see it happen all around me, and I'm sure that you see it too. And part of the problem is that we so often can tie our identity to our politics or our values or our beliefs or our faith. And when those things are challenged, we can respond in very ungracious ways because we feel like who we are as a person is being challenged. And the thing is, this is not something that's going to go away anytime soon, right? We live in such a divided culture. And I don't know about you, but when I look at the state of our culture and the state of our nation, I feel like it's just only getting worse. And there is a lot of work that we have to do in this area. I think something else that this crisis has shone a spotlight on is just how much injustice there is in our nation. The crisis itself hasn't caused necessarily all of the injustices. It has just magnified the broken systems that already exist. I mean, we can look and see the data on how the coronavirus is disproportionately affecting communities of color. We have seen this crisis shine a light on the economic disparities in our nation. I have heard beloved Asian American brothers and sisters talk about their experiences with racism, where people have said to them, screamed at them and said, "This is your fault," and go back to where you came from, and they're just experiencing this pain. And all of these things have been weighing really heavily on my mind, and I'm sure that many of you at one time or another have felt these things too. But here's the thing. Even though these things are very prevalent in our culture, even though these are things that we are facing and things that are frustrating, when I look at that, I know it can all feel really overwhelming, but I truly believe that there is a better way. Even though we experience division and ugly conflict within our relationships and with people that we love, I believe that it doesn't have to always be like that. I don't think that we're doomed to live in a world that's just full of hate and injustice, and that's just the way it is, and we just have to accept it and move on. No, I think we have hope, and I think there is a better way. And so then the question is, then how can we choose a better way? What is that better way, and what can we each personally do about it? When I think about all of these things, and then when I kind of bring this to the life of Jesus, and I look at Jesus and how Jesus lived and the things that he exemplified and the way that he taught us to live, there's this way of living and being in the world that Jesus taught us that I really believe is the solution to so much division and injustice. And I believe that if we follow this way that Jesus showed us, if we follow the example of this that Jesus laid out for us, I believe that we will be able to change this world. I believe that we will be able to change sort of the trajectory of this, that we don't have to continue to accept things are going to always be divisive or to just accept injustice, that there is a better way. Jesus preached this famous sermon called the Sermon on the Mount, and there's a portion of that what we now call the Beatitudes. And there's one in particular that I want to focus on today, and we find it in Matthew 5, verse 9, and it says this: "Blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called children of God." And to me, that's it. That's the key. I think the key to fighting against division and injustice is learning how to be peacemakers. And so for starters, we have to understand what that means. What does it mean to be a peacemaker? I think for most of us, at least I know for me, when I hear the word peace and when I associate that with our English language and kind of how we understand peace, I think of something being very calm, something being serene, like the absence of conflict, or things being very quiet and still, where there's not anxiety, there's not fear, where things just feel peaceful. But when we actually look at the scriptures, we find that when our Bibles talk about peace, that isn't the definition of what that word actually means. When we see the word peace in the Old Testament, this was translated from a Hebrew word, shalom. And shalom means well-being, wholeness, completeness, perfection of God's creation, and abundance. And then when we look in the New Testament, the Greek form of the word shalom is a word, irene. And the meaning of this, again, it's the restoration of relationships, it's wholeness, it's healing, it's completeness. So this idea of peace just meaning something is calm and serene and lacking conflict, that isn't exactly what it means. See, shalom means being whole and complete. It means restoration in our relationships. It means restoring wholeness for all of God's creation. It means flourishing for all, making wrong things right, bringing justice to a broken world. And so in light of this definition of peace, if this is what peace means when we read our scriptures, I think we can all agree that Jesus was like the ultimate peacemaker, right? I mean, Jesus came to restore wholeness to all creation. Jesus stood up against injustice time and time again. Jesus showed us what it looked like to have shalom in our relationships. Jesus showed us what it looks like to love our enemies. So then the question is, here at Icon, our mission is to help people become more like Jesus. And that doesn't mean we're just going to help all those people out there become more like Jesus. It means we all together collectively want to become more like him. So if that's the case, that I really believe that we can follow his lead in what it looks like to be a peacemaker. So how can we do that? How can we be like Jesus in this way? How can each of us individually be a part of bringing healing and wholeness to a broken world? What does it look like for us to be peacemakers? This is something that I've actually been really trying to learn a lot about lately, and I'm not perfect and I still have a long way to go, but two of my greatest teachers in my life when it comes to this idea of shalom and being a peacemaker are two women by the names of Oshita Moore and Lisa Sharon Harper. And they actually, their work is what inspired this message for today. Their work and their books have been so instrumental in me learning what it looks like for me to have an ethic of shalom in my life and how to work towards being a peacemaker and doing my part. And so I want to plug their books really quickly because I love to resource people. But their books are, Oshita Moore wrote a book called Shalom Sisters. So this book it's geared more towards women, but anybody can learn from it. I recommend it to everyone. And then Lisa Sharon Harper wrote a book called The Very Good Gospel. And I would highly recommend, if you want to read more about becoming a peacemaker and journey more on that, I would highly recommend those works. But in these books, both of these women, they address these different areas of our life in which we need shalom. And so today, I want to talk about a few of those and give us kind of some practical handles on how can we actually pursue shalom? How can we actually pursue being a peacemaker? And the first area that I want to talk about that is really important is we have to start with making peace within ourselves. We have to be a peacemaker within our own life. And here's the thing, and I'm sure most of you would agree with this, that we all tend to be our own worst critic, right? I don't know if you've ever been in a job interview where they or filling out a college application and they want you to list your strengths and weaknesses. Hands down, every time I can list 10 weaknesses right off the bat. But when it comes to listing strengths, I just sit there and I'm like, oh, I don't know, because we just tend to see the worst parts of ourselves. We tend to be our own worst critic. And I think there's so many reasons why we do this. One of them being that we live in a culture full of industries who literally make millions of dollars off of our belief that we aren't good enough. It's everywhere in our culture. They sell us the lie that if we buy what they're selling, then we will finally be good enough. If we have those clothes, or if we use this product, or if we lose that amount of weight, or if we drive that car, or have this amount of money, and so on and so forth. They're selling us this idea that if we just buy their product, then we can finally be good enough. We also live in a time when we are able to pick up our phone and scroll through and see all of these carefully curated lives of people on social media, which can lead us to comparing ourselves to others and feeling less than, feeling like we're missing the mark, or we're not doing good enough in this area or that area. And unfortunately, we can often get this same sense of unworthiness when it comes to the confines of our faith. We can think that we're so unworthy because of this thing that we struggle with, or because of that decision that we made that caused harm to someone else. And oftentimes we think we're unworthy because we have this theology about God that tells us that God is disappointed in us or angry at us, or that we have to earn our way into God's approval. And when you take all of these voices and you put them all together, we have all of them around us constantly telling us that we are not good enough. And these voices lead us to be at war within ourselves, always striving, always trying to fit into a mold that wasn't made for us, always trying to be better, always comparing ourselves to other people, always feeling like we're just not enough. And when we're constantly listening to these voices, it really keeps us from entering into shalom. It prevents us from being able to internally enter into a place of peace where we feel whole and we feel complete. And it's impossible to make peace with ourselves when all we are ever doing is trying to change who we are. The only way for us to truly make peace with ourselves is to fully embrace ourselves for who we are. And this means that we accept all the parts of ourselves, not just the ones that we want to shine up and make acceptable for other people to see, but it means we accept fully all of who we are. It means learning to believe that God made you exactly the way you are on purpose. It means believing that you are enough, that you are worthy of God's love. It means you can stop pretending, you can stop hiding behind this facade, and that you can actually be fully you. And now, I'm not saying here that there aren't times for self-reflection. I'm not saying that there aren't behaviors that maybe we are engaging in that aren't healthy for us, or that are causing harm to ourselves or to someone else. That's not what I'm saying here. But I'm talking about learning to fully embrace your personhood, to fully embrace the fact that you are an image bearer of the divine, that who you are is good, that you are worthy, that you are valued, you are cherished, and you are so deeply loved by God. I love this passage of scripture that we find in 1 Thessalonians 5:23, and it says this: "May God himself, the God of peace, sanctify you through and through. May your whole spirit, soul, and body be kept blameless at the coming of our Lord Jesus." And again, that word peace means Irene or shalom, that may the God of peace bring you wholeness, This word blameless that we see, it doesn't mean that you don't mess up or that you're without sin, but it means whole and complete, that we would be made whole. Another translation, the Message, puts it this way. It says, may God himself, the God who makes everything holy and whole, make you holy and whole, put you together, spirit, soul, and body, and keep you fit for the coming of our Master, Jesus Christ. God is working to make us whole. And being whole means living with integrity, that we are who we are and we don't feel like we have to pretend or hide parts of ourselves, that we can be fully who we are. And the more we become who we are, the more whole we become. We're not trying to live these fractured pieces of a life, but it all comes together in wholeness. When we bring our full selves, every part of who we are, to God and to this world, just as we are, when you bring it all to God and to this world just as you are, knowing that you are enough, and when you know that, then you can begin to experience this deep sense of shalom within yourself. The second thing that I want to talk about today, where it's important to be a peacemaker, is making peace with our people. Making peace with our people. So we talked about, making peace within ourselves, finding shalom within ourselves. And now I want to talk about making peace with our people. And I got to be honest, this one is a really tough one for me, because people, don't get me wrong. I love people. I really, really do. It's just that a lot of times it's easier to love people at a distance. There's this t-shirt that I saw floating around somewhere on the interwebs that you've probably seen, but it says, I love coffee and like 3 people. And I saw that shirt and I was like, oh, I resonate with that so deeply. And I know I'm a pastor and that caring for people is like in my job description, but man, sometimes it's exhausting. We as humans can be exhausting. And here's the thing, it's not you, it's me. I'm aware of this. I'm an introvert and I'm not very good at letting people in, and I hate conflict. So it's like a recipe for relational disaster, okay? And because of this, my biggest temptation is to only let like a few people into my life. And if we can also just agree on everything, that would be great. Okay, thanks. That's like kind of what I would prefer when it comes to my relationships with others. And I think if we're all honest, we would say that it's easier for the most part to be in close relationship with people who are just like us, who think like us, believe like us, and agree with us. This is why it's so tempting for us to just exist within echo chambers, because it feels safe and it feels comfortable and we're not being challenged and there's no conflict. And I actually lived like this for a really long time, where every person that was close to me, that I hung out with on a regular basis within kind of my circle of people, every single one had the same ideals, the same values, voted the same, practiced faith the same. It was just one big giant echo chamber. And yeah, this definitely makes life easier in terms of not having to face any kind of conflict. But the problem with this is that it also makes for a very stagnant and stale life. And to be really honest, that isn't actually what I want, because part of what makes life and relationships so beautiful are the things that make us different. And as I've been more intentional about developing close friendships with people that are very different from me, that think differently, that believe differently, I have seen so much beauty come from it. And, the different ways we see the world and our different opinions and perspectives, that's what makes our relationship just so much more rich and so much more diverse when we have that kind of those differences and the different opinions and perspectives. How boring would our world be if we were all exactly alike? It would be so boring. But even though it's necessary, it doesn't make it easy, right? It's hard to handle disagreements and differences, both with people we're close to and with people that maybe we're not as close to. But I think it's sometimes the ones that we're closest to where it can be the hardest with, right? Especially when we disagree on really big issues or things that are really important to us. So not only do we have to face disagreements, but I think there's also times in our relationships when we also have to face hurt. Sometimes we have been hurt by someone in a relationship, and sometimes we are the ones whose actions have caused hurt to others. We've all experienced times where either we've been disappointed by someone or we have disappointed someone. Relationships are messy, and learning to navigate disagreements and hurts and disappointments can be really, really hard. But at the end of the day, we all belong to each other. And no matter how introverted some of us may be, we know that we need each other and that our lives are more beautiful and fulfilling when we're living in community with one another. And in a world that is so divided, I think one of the greatest gifts that we as followers of Jesus can offer it is to be peacemakers. And so much of that, number one, starts within ourselves, but then it also starts with our people, with the people that we are in relationship with on the daily. So how do we do that? How do we work towards shalom in our relationships? How do we be a peacemaker in our relationships? Well, I think the first thing is that's really helpful for us. I think we have to learn to accept other people for who they are. Accept people for who they are. In the same way that we find shalom within ourselves by fully accepting ourselves for who we are, we bring shalom to our relationships by fully accepting others for who they are. You see, it's not our job to fix people or to change people, because people aren't projects. They're not problems to be solved or things to be fixed. They're people. We need to make room for differences with one another. If you have that coworker who holds a different worldview than you, great. Think about the ways that your views can be expanded by listening and learning from one another. If you have a friend who practices their faith differently from you, awesome. This means that you both have more opportunities for you to grow in your faith by sharing your experiences with each other. If your family member has a different political leaning than you, perfect. Think about how much of a chance that gives both of you to learn from one another. See, we will all be at our best and will be further down the path to shalom when all of us are celebrating each other and loving one another for exactly who they are. There's this beautiful quote by a rabbi by the name of David Zaslow, and it says this: "The peace movement I belong to is not liberal or conservative. It is both liberal and conservative. It is not left-wing or right-wing. It flies with two wings. It is not religious versus secular. Rather, it integrates the genius of both science and spirituality. The peace movement I belong to refuses to create an other out of the people with whom I may disagree on a particular issue. To the contrary, the peace movement I belong to is one of dialogue, tough dialogue, heart-wrenching dialogue, gentle dialogue, but always dialogue. Speech that goes back and forth with each side constantly challenging, refining, and purifying the other until we recognize that the other is none other than a reflection of our own selves." And I just thought that was so beautiful, because true shalom comes when we reject this us versus them mentality and we instead realize it has only ever been and ever will be us. It's just us. I think the second way that we can work towards being a peacemaker with our people is by being curious and asking questions. Being curious and asking questions. One really effective way to be a peacemaker is to seek to understand those with whom we disagree. And the best way to do that is to learn to be a good listener. We see in James 1:19, it tells us to be quick to listen and slow to speak. And this definitely does not come natural for me. I don't know about you, but this really has a pretty steep learning curve for me most of the time. Because the thing is, I think most of us tend to think that we're right about most things, right? But the fact is, none of us are going to be right 100% of the time. And a lot of times, the things that we're disagreeing and arguing about aren't even matters of who's right or who's wrong, but it's a matter of me having a different opinion than somebody else. But for most of us, if it's our opinion, it is suddenly the right opinion. But this isn't a good way of thinking if we want to be peacemakers in our relationships. If we want to be peacemakers, we have to seek to understand other people's points of view rather than just trying to communicate our own. And when we ask questions and when we listen well, we often find that it will give us a better understanding of why the person thinks the way they do. We'll be able to get kind of at the root behind why they believe what they believe. And it enables us to have a greater sense of empathy and compassion. And it gives us a fresh perspective and helps us also to see ways that maybe we aren't seeing things correctly, or maybe ways that we can grow and learn. Another important thing that we need to do in order to create shalom in our relationships is we need to learn to be truth tellers. We need to learn to be truth tellers. One misconception I think that many of us have about being a peacemaker is that making peace means the absence of conflict. But the thing is, this just simply isn't the case. In fact, facing conflict head on and telling the truth is what leads us toward peace. There's a difference between being a peacemaker and a peacekeeper. And my personality lends me more in the peacekeeping camp, where I want to avoid conflict and avoid telling the truth at all costs in order to not rock the boat. And there's lots of reasons why we do this. I mean, maybe for you, maybe you find yourself avoiding telling the truth about what you really think or about what you really believe because you aren't sure what people are going to think. And maybe you're afraid that you're going to lose your sense of belonging in that group if you actually communicate what you really think. But we fail to realize is that when we do this, when we pretend to be something we're not, when we're not honest, when we don't tell the truth about what's going on inside of us, we sacrifice this internal peace, this internal shalom, and it actually leads to further strife and further frustration down the road. Or maybe you're avoiding addressing some hurt and pain that someone caused you in the effort to keep the peace, right? Maybe you don't want to talk about these ways that someone has harmed you because you're afraid of what that might do to the relationship, or you don't know how they're going to respond. And sometimes we do this, especially in the church. We think that because we're a follower of Jesus, because we're a Christian, that this means that for some reason we're not allowed to feel the hurt that's been caused, and that, we're supposed to, give that person a pass, that we're supposed to, forgive and have grace. And so we need to just push that pain and that hurt aside. But remember, this is not how we make peace, because when we talk about peace, we're talking about wholeness and restoration and healing. And here's the thing, I did this for years. There was some pain and some deep hurt that was caused to me by someone else. Someone else had caused this hurt and this pain. And because I was a Christian, I always felt like that I needed to bury that down and just forgive and to have grace and to constantly justify that person's actions. And I never allowed myself to actually feel that hurt and to feel that pain and to name it. And I felt so guilty about that. And so for years I buried it, and it eventually started to wreak havoc on my soul. It's like I was coming out in all these other areas of my life because I was forfeiting having shalom, having true peace, because I was afraid to name that hurt. I was afraid of the conflict that might come with naming that and working through it. And that's not wholeness. That's not wholeness. It's not wholeness for me, and it's not wholeness for the relationship. Yes, we want to walk in forgiveness and grace, but this doesn't mean that you become a doormat and you just allow people to continue to hurt you. It doesn't mean that you ignore your own hurt and pain. It doesn't mean that we don't hold people accountable for the harm that they've caused, or that we allow other people to hold us accountable for harm that we may have caused. We can tell the truth and also hold each other with grace and love. And if we want to have wholeness in our relationships, we have to learn to be truth tellers. John 1:17 tells us that Jesus was full of grace and truth, and it's grace and truth together that make us whole. We will find that when we tell the truth and we also allow other people to do the same, that we will find wholeness and healing, and we will find that shalom that we so desperately need. So we've talked about, making peace within ourselves, and we've talked about making peace and finding shalom within our relationships. And the last part that I want to talk about today is making peace in our world. Because the thing is, it isn't enough for us to just experience shalom within ourselves. It's not just enough for us to experience shalom with our people. Because as followers of Jesus, being a true peacemaker extends further than that. Because see, shalom means the wholeness and the well-being for all of God's creation, not just me and mine. It means that we are seeking the well-being and the dignity and the wholeness and the healing for all. And I understand that this can feel really overwhelming sometimes for us, because it's like, well, how do I do that? How do I actually work towards shalom in our world? It just feels very big and kind of ethereal at times. I don't think it has to be, though. I think that we can all participate and contribute to bringing wholeness and shalom to the world around us. And one way is through what Oshita Moore, the author of Shalom Sisters, she calls it ordinary acts of peace. And I just thought this was so good, and it's such practical handles for us, is by performing ordinary acts of peace in our daily lives. And this could look like so many different things. Okay, this could be taking care of your elderly neighbor by bringing them groceries or offering to mow their lawn, and then maybe asking them some questions about their life, letting them know that their voice and their wisdom matters to this world, reminding them of who they are and letting them know that you see them. It could be taking an extra few minutes in line at the grocery store, or when you're picking up food at a restaurant, or when your barista is handing you your coffee, or someday when we're like going to salons again, or any of those areas where we happen to be in contact with service industry workers. It might be pausing and asking them some questions about their life, letting them know that you're so grateful for what they do, that you appreciate them, that they are seen and they are known and they are loved. Or maybe another way is maybe you know a single parent, which is incredibly hard when we're not in a pandemic, let alone right now. So maybe you know a single parent, and so you drop off a care package for them with a note reminding them that they are seen and loved, and that they are crushing this whole parenting thing. Where you're bringing some shalom, some wholeness, some healing into their world. Ordinary acts of peace, it means that we find ways to make someone else's day full of kindness, dignity, and appreciation. So we have things like that we can do in our everyday lives. I think another important thing for us to talk about today is a way that we can help bring shalom to our world is by pursuing justice. Remember earlier we talked about some of those injustices that we can see in our world, and being a peacemaker in our world, it means pursuing justice for all. Remember that shalom means the restoration of wholeness for all of God's creation. And the thing is, we don't have to look very far to see injustice. It is all around us. It is everywhere. So how can each one of us learn to recognize injustice and then to do our part in bringing about shalom? Well, I think for starters, I think we need to look to the margins and then not look away. Not look away. It's easy for us when we are in a place, a little bit more of a place of privilege, to kind of tune out some of those things because they're painful to see. And because we feel like we don't know how we can make a difference. But if we want to pursue justice, if we want to truly bring shalom in our whole world, then we need to train ourselves to not look away. We need to ask ourselves, who are the ones that are being pushed aside or forgotten? Where is it that we see inequity? Where are the ones who have been abused or who are experiencing trauma? Who are the ones who are being discriminated against? Who are the ones that no one is listening to? Who are the ones that you would deem to be other? Who are the people who are made in God's image? In what ways are their people, God's image bearers, being dehumanized? See, when we look around us and we see these things, that is where we can work for justice. And when we work for justice, it's justice that will usher in shalom. And when we see these things, we can find ways in which we can wage peace. We all have it in us. We all have a part to play. We all can wage peace. Maybe one way is this could be with matters of racial justice. and making the decision to dismantle systems of white supremacy, both internally and externally within the systems around us. This could be with kids who are in foster care, or with immigrants and refugees, or victims of human trafficking, or with the disabled community, or with people who are living in poverty. I know for me, one area that is really near and dear to my heart is I want to fight to bring justice for the LGBTQ community. I want to see LGBTQ persons given equal rights, and I want to see them valued and cherished both inside and outside of the church in every way. The thing is, all we have to do is open up our eyes and look around us, and we will see injustice, and then it's up to us to not look away, but to then ask ourselves, okay, now what? Now what can I do? Well, I think for starters is we can learn to listen to and learn from those who are a part of marginalized communities, who are leading the way and who are on the front lines doing justice work. I think we can follow them on social media, read their books, listen to their podcasts, support them financially, even if it's just a few dollars a month. There are so many people who are doing amazing justice work that we can listen to and learn from and partner with to continue to see those works towards justice advance and to flourish. I think we can use whatever platform we have to amplify their work. I think we can use our own platforms that we have to call other people to justice. I think whether it's through talking about it on social media or in conversations with our family, or just finding ways that we personally can not look away and to invest in works of justice. There are organizations globally that we can give to, like Preemptive Love, or the Reformation Project, or the Happy Nonprofit, or the Equal Justice Initiative, and so many more. We have local organizations like the Hayes Caldwell Women's Center, CASA, the Greater San Marcos Youth Council, the Hayes County Food Bank, the Boys and Girls Club. Reach out, contact one. Find out how you can best serve them and what they need. It will look different for all of us. But what matters is that we live with our eyes wide open, looking for ways that we can be a part of bringing justice and wholeness to this world. We all can play a part in this. As we get ready to close, I want to close with a couple of things. The first being a scripture. It's Colossians 3:15, and it says this: "Let the peace of Christ keep you in tune with each other, in step with each other." None of this going off and doing your own thing. I love that. Remember that we are all in this together. Keep in tune with each other, in step with each other. Let the peace of Christ, let that shalom and that desire for wholeness keep us in tune with one another and remind us that we belong to each other. May we seek shalom within ourselves. May we seek shalom with our people, and may we seek shalom in our world. May we not be focused on just ourselves, but may we let the shalom that Christ brings keep us in tune with the need for justice around us, and may we stay in step with each other, bringing shalom to all. And I want to end with this quote by Oshita Moore from her book, and it says this: "Once our broken hearts have been made whole, we can't help but seek wholeness for others. We've felt the warmth of the sun in the kingdom of God, and we can't stand the idea of a whole world shivering in darkness." So I challenge you today, Icon Church, may we make the effort to be peacemakers. May we work towards creating shalom in ourselves and in our people and in our world. Let me pray for you. God, I thank you so much for the shalom that you bring us. I thank you that you are constantly working for shalom in us, in our relationships, and in this world. So may our eyes be open to that. May our eyes be open to ways that we need to fully accept ourselves for who we are. May our eyes be open to ways in which we can better be peacemakers in our relationships with one another. And may our eyes be opened to ways that we can help to do ordinary acts of peace and to bring justice to this world. We love you with all of our hearts. In your name I pray. Amen. Well, I love y'all, and have a great week, and we'll see you right back here next week.